All right, and let's see if we can get that rolling. Okay, so Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 8 is our first verse and our fresh verse for the week. But while you're turning there, sort of recap what we have seen last week. So we saw, first of all, that Solomon is the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, he's the king of, at least he was in his lifetime, the king of Jerusalem. He begins the book by saying, the verse chapter 1 and verse number 1, the words of the preacher. So in this text, in the book of Ecclesiastes, he identifies, I think, a little bit more with his role as the preacher than he does necessarily his role as the king. So if the king sits down and he's going to write a book, he may have a lot of different things to say about the way he's ruled the government, about the laws that have been transpired, about politics, about economics, all of those sorts of things. But Solomon doesn't take on necessarily the role of the king in this text. He takes on the role of the preacher. And it's quite interesting, I think, to me, because I've never really considered him a preacher before, but he considered himself as such, and so I think God must have considered him that way as well. So he's the king, according to verse number 1, king in Jerusalem, but he's also the preacher. He's the son of David, and so we know this is indeed Solomon. Now, all good preachers should follow some sort of format in their sermons. I think they should. I've seen, maybe sometimes preachers will get up and it seems like they just chasing rabbits all over the place. What was it? When you get all said and done, when it's all said and done, you think, well, I didn't hear anything that wasn't right, but I'm not sure exactly what I heard. Because there was no theme, it was no like one focus, and then a bunch of other texts that fed into that focus, and to prove out the focus. So it was kind of like a random collection of thoughts. But I think any good preacher has a theme to his sermon, whatever he's going to preach about. And Solomon has a theme that he's preaching about in this book. He says in verse number 2, here I think is his theme, and he's going to set out for the rest of the book to prove the theme that he goes with in verse number 2. And he says, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher." So here is his theme. Here's his thesis. Here's the subject of his discourse before his audience. That everything is vain. That it's all vanity, and not only that, but it's vanity to the extreme, to the 10th degree. It's vanity to multiplied thousands. Why do I say it that way? Because he says vanity of vanities. So it'd be one thing if something was just vanity, but it's another thing if it's a vanity of vanities, a double vexation, it's doubly vain. What does vain mean? It means empty. And I think what he's trying to tell us, here's the theme of his sermon, and you will see that as we go through this, that everything under the sun, when it's all said and done, is vain if it is outside of God, and outside of God's purposes, and outside of pleasing God in it. It all becomes vain. And stuff becomes vain and empty pretty quickly. It does. And that's why we are never satisfied. That's why our closets are overflowing with clothes, including mine. It's true. That's why we always want a new this or a new that, because we're never satisfied with what we have. Why? Because in the end, it's just vain. It satisfies maybe for a day, 2 days. If you get a new truck, you might be satisfied with it for 2 months, and pretty soon you'll find that it is vain, that it doesn't thrill you as much as it used to. And in fact, now it takes a lot of your money just to keep it running up and down the road, because it likes to take a lot of gas. And so you find out that everything in the end that is outside of God is vain. And that's the purpose of Solomon's sermon here. So he says, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher." Vanity of vanities. And here is the statement that he will seek out through these 12 chapters to prove. All is vanity. Everything is vain. It's empty. When I have read that in the past, I sort of thought to myself, well, that seems kind of negative, and I always sort of didn't fully understand the book of Ecclesiastes. I thought, man, he's kind of coming at it from a really broken and sad and depressed place. But I think actually he's coming at it from the position of having lived a life of power, of authority, of money, of wealth, also of wisdom, and now he's been able, through his money and power, to pretty much have anything he wants. And we don't necessarily know that experience. I don't know what that's like. If I knew what that was like, I would have a house in the country.
Yeah.
And I would have a big old pole barn with every tool I ever wanted.
Yeah.
Amen. That's what I would do. Amen. And I would have a new truck.
Yeah.
Amen. Brand new. I mean, brand new. I get a new truck every month if I had the money.
Yeah, parking that barn.
And you know, so we don't know really what it's like to be that wealthy.
Right.
We know what it's like to be fairly wealthy in the sense that if we compare our lives to the lives of people over in third world countries, man, we've got it pretty good. But we don't know what it's like to just have so much money that nothing is outside of our reach, and we can just have it all at our fingertips. And we sometimes might sit back and think about this and say, well, if I had this, then I would be happier. If I had their money, then I would be happier. Or if I had their wealth or their power or their fame, then I would be happier. And I think Solomon then has lived a life of all of that, has had nothing deprived of him. Yeah. And still at the end of his life, as an older man, comes back to this thought: it was all vain. In the end. It was all empty. And it satisfied me nothing. And that's why I think I would want a new truck once a month. Why? Because eventually it would become vain and you'd want to cash it in for the next day. Right? That's true. So that's the thesis of his sermon, and so we're going to pick up this week with verse number 8, and we're going to see, I guess, sort of how he seeks to prove that out. So verse number 8 says, all things are full of labor. Now, he's just in verse number 5 discussed the sun. You can look at it in verse number 5. He says, the sun also ariseth. So when the sun's arising, so to speak, it is full of labor. It's moving. It's always doing something. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, right? There's always, of course, we know, nonetheless, from the earthly perspective, the sun comes up, the sun goes down. It's always moving. The earth is spinning on its axis. The earth is full of, the earth itself, the object, the ball, the sphere, is full of labor. Right. It's always spinning. That's what makes the 24-hour day. It's not night and morning and so forth and so on. It's always rotating on its axis. It's always going in its orbit, which makes the seasons. If you look at the earth and say, man, this place looks pretty calm. No, it is full of labor. It's moving. It's always doing something. The sun is full of labor, he says in verse number 5. Verse number 6, he said, the wind is full of labor. The wind goes down toward the south. And it turned out, and this is the interesting place. This is an interesting thing, I think, about his argument here. He says, the sun, verse number 5, it arises and it goeth down and hasteth to his place where he arose. And so from his perspective, the sun is doing this every day. It comes up, it goes down, and in the end it goes down the exact same spot it went up, the exact same spot it went down yesterday, and it's just going to repeat this continual cycle. And you think, man, that's majestic. Well, it's majestic until you're doing it day in and day out, and all of a sudden now it feels vain, it feels empty. There's nothing new, there's nothing majestic anymore about it. I do the same thing every day. I rise up, I go down, I get up at this time, I go down at this time, I get dressed, my clothes are here, my shoes are there. Amen. I mean, we're creatures of habit. At least I am. My clothes, I say to my family, my clothes are there, and they know exactly where I put my clothes every day. Amen. So that I'm ready for work the next morning. Right? So there's nothing new under the sun, and it feels sometimes awfully vain. It comes up, goes down the same place. The wind, verse 6, it goes toward the south, and then turneth to the north, and it whirleth, and it makes a big controversy. You can see it, and it has an effect on the things around you. But in the end, the wind returneth again to its circuits. It just returns back to where it's always gone. So the wind has a purpose, but its purpose is the same stuff day in and day out, and it feels vain. And watch what happened in verse number 7. All the rivers run into the sea. So now the rivers are running. They're daily moving. The rivers then are full of labor, aren't they? The wind is full of labor. It's always moving. The sun is full of labor. So when he gets to verse number 8, he just wants you to know that having read verse 5 and understood verse 6 and understanding verse 7, then he says, here's the truth of it all. All things are full of labor. It's not just the sun or the wind or the rivers. It's everything. And it's almost like if you study nature, everything is constantly moving.
Yeah.
Everything is. Like the dogs. I have dogs in my house, and they are always moving. I mean, always doing something, always into something, never satisfied. Amen. 5 o'clock in the morning, they start scratching, what now? And then they went right back in, and then they bark as soon as they get out there. And you know what I'm talking about. Amen. So things are full of labor. The dogs live a life full of labor. The animals live a life full of labor. We live a life full of labor. And it would be one thing that if we lived a life full of labor and at the end we seemed like it made a difference, but pretty much the wind does some stuff, but it goes right back to where it came from. The sun does some stuff, but it goes right back to where it came from. The rivers do some stuff, but they never fill up the sea. No. You never see the sea overflow, at least on a constant basis, as a result of all the rivers that run into it. And it seems almost, it's full of labor, but it seems almost kind of empty because it feels like we're accomplishing nothing. Are you with me?
Yeah, amen.
So he says in verse number 8, all things are full of labor. And he said, man cannot utter it. So when I read that, I thought, man, I got to really think about that. Man cannot utter it. Man cannot, what does that mean? I think what he's trying to say is there is so much labor in everything that if man sat down to catalog it and to categorize it, he wouldn't even be able to utter all of the labor that the whole world is constantly full of.
Right.
It's constantly moving. It's constantly shifting. It's constantly, humans are constantly in progress, constantly in a state of change, and moving and building and sweating and laboring and being intensely and developed in labor. And yet at the end of it, it feels like we accomplished nothing. And there's so much labor that we couldn't even begin to catalog all of the labor that the world is full of. Right. Now, the world is full of this labor, and it would be one thing if we could look back into the world and say, okay, our labor made a difference. But oftentimes, it feels like at the end of it, it's just things that are, things that will be. And it feels like we haven't made much of a difference at all. Right. So then all things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. He can't declare all of the different labors that are happening around him. The eye is not satisfied with seeing. Now that's interesting. Mm-hmm. No matter how much we see with the eye, we are never fully satisfied. Now that's true. Amen. Yeah. I remember when I went down to the Smoky Mountains, and you go down there and you sit out on the bow or on the deck there of the cabin, and you look out and say, "Man, these mountains are beautiful." And they are beautiful. And you take pictures and you take it in, and it looks beautiful. And then guess what happens? Then you get online and you see a picture of the Rocky Mountains. You say, "Man, I cannot wait till one day I can get out there and see the Rocky Mountains." Right. No matter what I see. Yeah. And they call it Rocky Mountains, I think so. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're satisfied with the Smokies for a moment until you want to get out and find something new and see something new. And our lives are full of that kind of labor. Our lives are full of that kind of expending of our energy. But the truth is, we only have so much energy to give. Right. So what we're going to find, I think, and what Solomon finds is, he keeps using this phrase throughout this book, and you find it at the end of verse number 9, and he says this phrase, under the sun. So the point is, all things under the sun are full of labor. We spend all of our time laboring for them. As soon as we see one thing, we can't wait till we see the next. As soon as we experience this, we can't wait till we experience that. We're never satisfied. We're never content. We don't know how to be content. We don't know how to be satisfied. Yet we spend all of this labor. It's all for that which is under the sun. It profits a little in a moment, but in the end it's vain. And we only have so much energy and so much time and so many days upon the earth to pursue something that is a higher value that actually makes a difference. But we spend all of our time laboring for that which is under the sun, that doesn't satisfy, that is vain, instead of laboring for that which is above the sun, right, and laying up our treasures in heaven instead of laying them up on the earth. Right. Everybody with me? Amen. So he says the eye can, verse number 8, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Now that's interesting to me. So the eye is not satisfied with seeing. Like, no matter how much beauty it sees, it always wants to see more.
Right.
And the ear is not satisfied. No matter how much beauty it hears, it always wants to hear more.
Right.
It's kind of like Christendom in that sense. That we always are longing for the next song.
Right.
Right? It's true. We like it. We like songs. We like to hear things, and because it's beautiful to the ear. But after a while, its beauty sort of seems, in many ways, to fade off. You hear a new song released in Christian radio, and it's beautiful, and you listen to it over and over. Maybe you don't, but I would. I would listen to it over and over and over again, over again. And then, like 4 weeks later, I'm sitting back thinking, man, why the beauty of that song is just kind of faded for me.
Right.
Like it's not. I mean, it's the same song it was then, but there's something that is worn off. Like my ears are never satisfied. It wants a new song, so it can't wait for the next big hit. And I think this text describes human people in general. We are never satisfied. We always want something new. We never enjoy what we see with the eye. We never lastingly enjoy what we hear with the ear. We want always to find something new. And here's the trouble, verse number 9. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun.
Amen.
So this is the vanity of it, isn't it? Because we always want something new because we're not satisfied with what we have. But there is nothing new under the sun. And I think when he says that, he's kind of relating it to nature. Because why did I say that? Because he's come out of the discussion of nature. He says in verse number 5, the sun does its thing every day, nothing new. So I used to be mesmerized with the sunrise, but now it's just mediocre. It happens every day. And most of the time I even ignore the fact that it's happening and don't pause to enjoy the beauty of it because I've seen it and now I'm looking for something new. But the trouble is there is nothing new.
Right.
There's not going to be a new sun tomorrow.
Right.
It's not going to, with relatively speaking, with relationship to clouds and where you're at on the earth, it's not going to look any different tomorrow. It's going to be the same sunrise I've seen all the other days, and the wind's not going to do anything different than what it did, and there's nothing new there, and the rivers aren't going to do anything what they did. And I used to be intrigued by the rivers and watching them turn and flow and fill into the sea, but I watched them do that now for 20 years, and the sea still is not full. It's just nothing new there. So when it comes to nature, that which has been is what will be.
Right.
And so people spend their entire lives chasing after something to satisfy them,
right,
when they should realize that the reality is there's nothing new under the sun that's going to achieve that.
Yeah.
And so then what we faced with, then we're faced with these consequences and this thought. If everything is vain that is under the sun, and it's all a continual cycle of repetition. I've always been a fan of repetition. I think if you can repeat something, you're doing well. Like if you need to master a skill, all you need to do really is begin to do that thing with repetition, over and over and over and over and over again. And if you do that, your hands will develop the patterns needed to adhere to the process to make it flow. And on day 1, it may feel awkward, but on day 60, through repetition, day in and day out, you're going to achieve and master the skill that you're looking for. So I've always been a fan of repetition, but also I think Solomon is sort of telling us that repetition sometimes seems awfully vain because it's the same thing day in and day out. Amen. Now, if you needed a midlife crisis, this could probably give you one. Amen. Amen. I mean, when you think about it, when you really think about it, and think about whether stuff, and I see that inquisitiveness in young people. I see that I sit back and I watch, and young people have this, and I had it when I was a kid. You have this desire to get out and to see what the world's all about. Right. And what you don't know at that age is you're going to figure out that the world is exactly about what Solomon figured out, which is exactly what I figured out, which is exactly what you will eventually figure out. But there's this desire in you to like, is what I believe all that really is in the world. There's got to be something more than small town America. There's got to be something deeper. There's got to be something under the sun that's different than this. And by the way, that sort of inquisitiveness is not necessarily a bad thing. It is what populates growth. It's what stirs progress, right? I mean, thank God somebody decided one day, well, maybe it's possible to have a light bulb, right? I mean, so that nature to explore is sort of what drives progress and invention. So it's not a bad thing, but at the end, I think what you're going to find out is that every generation before us needed light too. They just got it through fire instead of through the light bulb. And the reality is, when we needed to see back then, we used fire. When we need to see today, we use electricity. But the truth is, we needed to see then, we need to see now. There's nothing new under the sun. Right? I mean, it's a parallel. What is in this generation is a parallel to what is in that generation. But that generation needed to see too. Now we pipe natural gas into our houses, put it into a furnace, and the furnace does its thing and blows it out. Why? Because we need to be warm in the winter. Well, don't look now, but every generation before us needed to be warm in the winter too. And they heated their homes. They just heated them differently than we do now. So, well, in this generation we have a furnace. Man, that's something new. Oh, not really, because every other generation needed to be warm too. They just found other methods to do it. It was a parallel, the same thing. Right? I mean, thank God that somebody did go out and figure out how to do the furnace. But the truth is, when you look back on it, it's pretty much all the same. The same rivers that ran then are running now. The same wind that stirred then, stirred now. The same cycles, the same sun. Nothing new under the sun. Now, if we get to that place where we realize there is nothing new under the sun, then it is going to do one of two things, I think. It is going to either stop us dead in our tracks from having an inquisitive nature that wants to go out and see what there is, and cause us to be full of depression and anguish, and man, this is a boring life. Or we're going to say to ourselves, if there is nothing new to be experienced under the sun, and if it is also true that my eye is not satisfied with what I see, and my ear is not satisfied with what I hear. Now I'm bringing two different things into our hearing right now. Number one, I'm not satisfied with what I see, and I'm not satisfied with what I hear. I want to hear something new. I want to see something new. But under the sun, there is nothing new. What is, has always been, and what shall be is what was, and so there's nothing new. I want to see something new, but there is nothing new. That is a spot either for depression, right? Or looking up above the sun. And in that spot, we will find something new. And so I think what Solomon is saying is, in this sense, everything is vain because it doesn't satisfy continually. You're never happy with it. You always got to reach after something new, but there is nothing new. It's all the same stuff that's always been. Thus, man, either you are constantly depressed, or you begin to lay up your treasure in heaven. And there, when you get there, you will finally be satisfied with something that will forever and completely satisfy you. And when you get there, you won't be looking for anything new. Because you'll be continually happy forever. But on this world, man, it seems like sometimes it's just all sort of vain. Verse number 10, are you with me? All right, verse number 10 then. He says, is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? So he has made a statement in verse number 9. It's like a preacher when he preaches. He makes a statement. He says, well, heaven's going to be wonderful. And then he may invite his hearers to consider the statement that he has made. And he may even follow that up with the question, which would sort of stir the hearts of his hearers to think about the statement that he has made. So his statement is verse number 9, there's nothing new under the sun. Now he feels so strongly about that he says in verse number 10, is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? He invites his hearers to ponder that very question. What have you found in your life that other generations did not? What about them? What about it? We have this and we have that. Well, if you look back in it, you will find out that they had parallels of the same thing. we may have the ability to make better steaks in this generation. Just throwing something out there. I don't know if we do or don't, but we may have in our modern times the ability to make a great porterhouse steak, which sounds really lovely, right? But don't you think that people ate cows in the previous generations? Well, sure they did. Right? So the way you say, well, this is the part of modern delicacy. Yeah, but it's a part of what always has been, too, because it's been happening. It's just happening to a different way. It's a slightly different parallel, but it's always been there the whole time. So previous generations needed food. We need food. Previous generations needed clothing. We need clothing. We may look different, but it's clothing nonetheless. Previous generations needed shelter.
Yeah.
We need shelter.
Right.
So he invites us here to answer the question, particularly as it relates to nature and human beings within nature. Is there anything that you can think of where it has been said, this is new? And if there is, then we continue to consider what he says going forward. He says, verse number 10, it hath been already of old time, which was before us. So his contention, his statement within his sermon is whatever is what has been. You know, we live in a great country filled with foolish leadership for the most part.
Yeah.
Great country, foolish leaders. We're not the first people to be here.
Right.
I mean, civilization after civilization, government after government has been filled with good people and ridiculously foolish leadership.
Right.
And it caused the system of government to topple or to collapse or caused the downfall of the empire. But we are not the first people to be here.
Right.
And if God allows this thing to transpire and America collapses and something else rises in this place, know this of a surety. The same cycle will sort of repeat. It's a cycle of captivity, of a lack of freedom, and it's a cycle. Then all of a sudden, it transpires into people knowing God and desiring freedom, because where God is, there is freedom, and so they fight for freedom, and they get freedom, and they attain freedom, and then they take freedom take advantage of freedom, and they take freedom for granted until they get on the cycle, part of the cycle where we are right now, and then all of a sudden, the freedom that they once knew collapses, and they are in bondage again until somebody awakens, and the whole cycle repeats over and over again. Whatever has been is what will be.
Right.
So what is the conclusion of the matter? Well, it seems like it's kind of vain, because I'm not satisfied with what has been.
Right.
And I'm looking for something new. So he says in verse 11, there is no remembrance of former things. He said, I think verse 11 is put in there sort of as an argument against any objections that could have been raised in verse number 10. Let's say somebody came up with something that they felt like was new in their generation that had come up under the sun. They would then say, I think his argument would be in verse number 11 against that would be, there is no remembrance of the former things. Perhaps the reason you think it is new is because you don't know that much about your history. There's no remembrance of the former things.
Right.
Either well, this furnace is new to this generation. Yeah, but that's because we are ignorant largely of all the previous generations before us and how they needed heat and how they got heat, right? And so this song is new. But if you go back and if we're not ignorant of the former things, if we're not unknowledgeable about that which was previous to us, we'll find out that all kinds of cultures had beautiful music, and
right.
Some of it sounds a whole lot like some of the stuff they sing today.
Right. Yeah.
There's no. So why would you think there's something new? Well, because the chances are you're ignorant of that, which is not you, but the reader. If you think that you have achieved something new in your generation, you will find out that there is no remembrance of the former things, and that's the reason why you think that. But in the end, there's a parallel prior to you of that very same thing. Neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. Right. So he even makes the argument for the next generation. He said the next generation will be ignorant of this generation. And they'll think that they're discovering new, something that's amazing. This is not like this generation is pretty much obsessed with homosexuality, transgenderism, and so forth and so on. They're not the first generation that has been obsessed with that. That was written in the Bible in Romans chapter number 1, 2,000 years ago. Right? Yeah. And so they think that they're woke. They think that they've woken up, that they have awakened to some new higher purpose. But the reality is they've awakened to the same stuff that always has been and has always been a source of ruin to a culture and to themselves. So verse number 11 says there is no remembrance of the former things, and that's why you might assume that there is something new. Verse 12 says, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Now, and so I think that he is sort of, in verse number 12, reminding his hearers about who exactly he is and who he was. That he was king in Jerusalem, in Israel, over Israel in Jerusalem. That he had the power and the might and the wealth and the opportunity to attain happiness.
Yeah.
That if there was anybody in Israel that would attain happiness, it would have had to been the king.
Right.
And if there's anybody, and by the way, you know why he had 700 wives and 300 concubines? Because he was constantly looking for something to make him happy.
Oh, yeah.
But he couldn't find it, so he just kept multiplying to it. It was, so what is it? What's the point? I think the point is the average person cannot afford 700 wives.
One would.
I joke about it, but I'm not going to make it because. I see that look. She's like, it was just an overall joke. Oh, bless the Lord. All right, so he probably can't afford that, and doesn't, but Solomon was king, and he could afford it, so he did it. But guess what? It was all vain in the end too.
Right.
Nothing new under the sun. All vanity. And so he said, if there's anybody, I think he reminds us who he is so that we know that when he is making these arguments, it's almost like this, to some degree, if we would take what he's saying at face value, and we would understand who he is, what he's experienced, and the opportunity he's had to find happiness under the sun.
Yeah.
And we would just take it at face value and say, if Solomon couldn't attain it under the sun, then I will not attain it under the sun. If he, as king, and with all the power, prestige, and wealth, could not find happiness under the sun, outside of a relationship with God, living above the sun, then there's no way I'm going to do that either. So then I better just look to God. Right? So he says, I, the preacher, was king. We are constantly confronted and sadly so with the fact that people who have wealth seem to be happier than us in many ways. They portray themselves as happier.
Right.
They portray themselves as having it all. They carry themselves in a way that says they have it all. Right. But behind closed doors, they commit suicide, even though they have wealth. And fame and prestige and all of those sorts of things. I think about it. In fact, I mentioned him in the last class, and for some reason he keeps popping up in my mind. A man by the name of Robin Williams, who was a comedian in this country, and much of what he had to say was not worth hearing, but he did make people laugh nonetheless. And he spent his life making people laugh, but on the inside, he had fame. Everybody knew who he was.
Yeah.
He made movies. He was a movie star.
Right.
He had wealth that was accrued from his movie star life, and so now he's got wealth. He's got fame. And when you got wealth and fame, that pretty much means nothing else that you want is really off limits. People know me, and that feels good to be known, but they would also sometimes just give you whatever you want because they know you and they're so enamored with who you are. Yeah. That's why musicians have groupies that follow them around, right? We know this. We know the story. So there's the fame, and then there's the wealth, which means there's really nothing outside of my reach. And what I'm going to find is that my eyes aren't satisfied with the seeing, my ears aren't satisfied with the hearing. I will continue to dump money into everything that's under the sun. It'll be full of labor for me, but it will not be full of happiness.
Right.
Thus, in the end, I will, Robin Williams committed suicide while making the whole world laugh. Sad, while apparently making other people happy. Miserable, while apparently making other people smile. So what is the point? I think the point is, I think Robin and everyone in the world would do well to read the book of Ecclesiastes, to consider what it says, and to ponder the meaning of the text, so that you could see ahead of time, man, it's all going to be vain. No matter how much wealth, no matter how much power, prestige, no matter what you get, you're not going to be satisfied as long as you're living for that which is under the sun.
Right.
Brother Jason,
Amen.
I think sometimes when, I've never been rich, but rich people who can just buy whatever they want and have whatever they want, they don't need God.
Yeah.
Right. They won't turn to God because they got everything. And I think sometimes it takes what we've had, hard knocks, to actually turn to God.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so I think that has a big part in the depression and all that stuff that the funny people
Life without God is depression.
Yeah.
Very depressing.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, Sister Kelly. I really do.
Yeah.
You're right, because when you come to the end of your road and you fall down on your knees and say, woe is me, and you look up to God, but those sorts of people sometimes never go there. That's a sad thing. Yeah. Amen. So he said in verse number 12, I, the preacher, was king over over Israel and Jerusalem. And watch what he says in verse 13. He says, I gave my heart to seek and to search out. Now, I want you to pay attention to that right there. He says, I gave my heart. Now, that is a whole statement that is a powerful one, that when I read this text over the last week or two, I sort of skipped over it at the first. But he says, I gave my heart, which means that he was serious. It means that he had a fixed purpose, that he was resolute, that his heart was in it, that his mind was in it, that his emotions was in it, that he was committed to it. He gave his heart, he put his heart in it. Have you ever heard somebody say, I put my heart in it, or I gave it my all, or I gave it the best I had, or I left it all on the cord, or whatever they say, however they refer to it. But they put themselves in it, they give themselves to it, they give their all to it. So whatever he's about to give himself to, he wants you to know that he was fixed in his position, that he was serious about it, and he was serious on purpose, and he gave his all to it. I gave my heart, here's what he gave his heart to seek and to search out by wisdom. Now that's interesting. Some people give their heart to seek and to search out things, but they don't search those things out by wisdom. No. But Solomon said, I gave my heart to seek and to search out something, and I sought it by wisdom. I sought it by wise principles, by the right principles, by moral principles, by godly principles, by wisdom. And he said, concerning all things that are done under the heaven. So he said that he sought and he searched and tried to understand all things that are done under the heaven. This is sore travail hath God given to the sons of men to be exercised therewith. Now that is a mouthful, I think. So I guess first of all, he's put his heart into seeking and to searching out the way everything under the heaven works. Which is why he details how the sun works, verse 5. It's why he details how the wind works, verse 6. Why he details how the rivers work, verse 7. Because he has given his heart to understand how nature works. And so he's given it, and he's sought it by wisdom. There was something in him that wanted to know how things worked, and so he sought it out. He looked after it. But here is the kicker. When it was all said and done, he found that the searching of it was nothing but travail, was nothing but labor, and it was something that God had put on us. Like he says that God has given to the sons of man. So God had put this inquisitive nature in us to know things. And so some people know them by immoral ways, and some people know them by studying other things, and reading somebody that came before them, and other people study them by just going out and studying stuff and looking into it. And it's full of travail, it's full of labor, it's full of difficulty, and it's something that God has put in us to be exercised by the sons of men. it almost appears to me that it goes back to the fall. That man ate of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil.
Yeah.
And what man was saying was he wanted knowledge. He wanted to understand. He wants to know how things work. The man was, Adam and Eve were naked, but they didn't know it.
Right.
And all of a sudden they eat this forbidden fruit that is supposed to make them wise. But instead it makes them wise to sin. And so they want to be wise. And so in the fall, God placed a curse upon them. And that curse was that they would travail, that they'd be full of labor, that they would continually be looking for a way to figure out how things worked.
Right.
But they could never fully understand it all.
Right.
And so at the end of it all, they're going to find that even though they've sought it by wisdom, it's been full of travail, and it's been a vexation of their spirit.
Right.
Now, I ask myself, well, why is it that it would be full of nature? Or excuse me, why would it be full of travail? And why would it be a vexation of spirit to know something? I find this, that the more I know, the more I discover I don't know.
Right.
And the more I discover that there is to be known.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I, in my older middle-aged life, I guess, I've gotten to the place where I want to know things.
Right.
Like, I'll be honest with you, here's a boring fact for you. Last night, before I went to bed, I watched a 1-hour YouTube video about amperage, wattage, and voltage.
Oh, yeah.
Just because I wanted to know what the difference between amperage and voltage and wattage was and how it worked within the electrical circuit.
Yeah.
Isn't that ridiculous?
No.
No, it ain't meant for them.
No.
It's interesting to me, huh?
At midnight.
At midnight, yes. It's very interesting to me because, well, for a lot of reasons, but I find that it has many implications in my life, particularly as it relates to electro-powder coating and powder coating with electricity and so forth and so on, amperage and voltage, and then it relates to the way we wire our houses and how things work and what circuits we put them on. You all know what I'm talking about. And you want to understand the flow of electrons and electricity and why does that happen? And you just want to know things, right? But the more I know, the more I find out that I don't know. And I'm never satisfied with the level of knowledge that I do have. Never. I want to pour a concrete slab. Just because I've never poured a concrete slab. That's the reason I want to do it. I'm going to pour a concrete slab here pretty soon. Just because I never have. I'm going to do it. It's almost like it's a blessing to be able to know, to be able to figure out, but it's almost a curse because at the same time, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, and the more you want to know, and you're on this continual path of labor, and then you get to the end of your life, you think, well, man, now I know electrons, and I know amps, and I know voltage, and I know how to pour concrete, I know this, I know that, but the truth is, I didn't lay up my treasure above the sun. I spent so much time on mastering the sun, everything under the sun, that I wasn't focused above it, in heaven, and then at the end of my life, I find that when I pass from this life, every bit of knowledge I've accrued and every bit of skill that I've gained, it goes away with me.
Right. Yeah.
Like it will not benefit anybody else from that point. I knew a man who was a very wise man in the scriptures. He just spent his life after he got saved studying the scriptures, and I enjoyed being around him. And I enjoyed listening to him. And when he would speak, I would listen. When I was in the car with him, I wasn't talking. I was letting him talk because I was enjoying what was coming out and listening and gathering it in. That was the type of man that he was. Yeah. And then he passed. He left this world. Yeah. And I remember even at that age, which was been years ago, probably 15 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. I remember at that age thinking to myself, man, the day he passed, all the knowledge and all the wisdom and all the biblical understanding that he had ever gained passed with him. And now that whole resource is no longer in my world and in the world at large. It's just funny how you could spend your whole life studying something and master it. And then when you pass, it passes with you, and no other future generations, unless you write it down or something, is sort of going to glean from that again. Yeah. All of the knowledge. So and then you find out that gathering all this knowledge it's sort of vain, not biblical knowledge, but that's a huge benefit to you in the moment and to you and to those around you in the moment. But gathering all this knowledge in some ways is just a vain pursuit.
Yeah.
So it's vexation of spirit. He says, verse number 14, I have seen all the works that are under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Man, I mean, what thing to say? I have seen all of it. It's all vain. It all produces a vexation of the human spirit. I remember when I cut my thumb, and I remember it because it was just a few months ago. And I would like to forget it, but the thumb won't let me forget it.
Right.
And I remember that I wanted to know everything the surgeon knew. So I had my first appointment with the surgeon, and then he starts throwing out all these terms, like, you know, he started throwing all these the bones and the tendon structures and what this tendon is and where they can take it from here. And I thought by the time I go back to that next appointment, I'm gonna have all that stuff memorized. so I can talk surgery with him. It didn't work. He still knew more than I did. But it was, in the end, it's just a vexation of spirit. It's just something you do because there's a desire to know things. It almost seems like a good thing in many ways. But in the end, it's just kind of a vexation of spirit because no matter how much you know, you discover there's still a world that you don't understand. And you don't know.
Well, Jason.
Yes, ma'am.
I like to sit and watch ants work.
All right.
I mean, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
So I could get you wanting to learn something.
Yeah. You know, the ant colonies, I think there's a reference in Proverbs chapter 6, and God says, go to the ant, thou sluggard, and learn from them. Why? Because they're always full of labor. They're always moving. They're not sitting around watching TV. They're achieving the purpose of their intent.
Even pour new dirt on top of them and doesn't kill them.
Oh, yeah. If you step on them, it works. Not saying you should do that, but bad joke.
Or like a mole, you can dig a hole and bury it, and it ain't gonna hurt it now.
Yeah, they'll be back. Amen. True enough. Amen. But that's good. I think it's right up my way of thinking as far as watching the ants and seeing how things work.
Right.
Verse 15. He says, "That which is crooked cannot be straight." Now, I think here is the way that he mainly finds that all of his knowledge of everything and the way it worked and his desire to know things. Here's, I think, the main way that it became a source of vexation and vanity to him. Because that which was crooked couldn't be fixed by him. Mm-hmm. He could look into it. He could discover it. He could gain knowledge of it. But he couldn't change it. He couldn't change it. Now, there are some things we can change. But the world has created so many scientists that have gone out and they've discovered either a real problem or a fake problem. I can't quite tell sometimes. Right. But called, climate change, which we certainly know that's just propaganda, but at least in my opinion. But nonetheless, they discovered this propaganda, and now they discovered what they believe to be true, and now they said, here's the problem. What can we do to take this crooked thing and make it straight? Right. But what they're finding is no matter what they do to take the crooked thing and make it straight, even though they've gained knowledge of the fact that it's crooked, they've gained knowledge of the fact that in their mind something's wrong, they cannot fix it. They cannot make it straight. They go to electric cars, but they have to go over to these other countries across the sea where they have no environmental policies whatsoever and gather all the lithium and make all the batteries and destroy the ozone. It doesn't matter if you destroy the ozone over China or over America, you're still destroying the ozone. You may have made America's portion of the world a little better, but you made that one a little dirtier. You discovered a problem, and because you sought one to understand. Right. But in the end, it's still crooked. Right. You still didn't make it straight. Right. And that's the trouble. I think that's trouble for me. I feel that a lot of times. People come to me with a problem, and I want to make it straight.
Right.
I want to fix it. It's just I guess it's my nature. I don't know. Well, what can we do? What are we going to do to fix it? If I come up against a problem that I think is unfixable, I might have a nervous breakdown. I will study it until I figure out the answer. I guarantee it. But what I'll find out is that some things are crooked and cannot be made straight.
Right.
And he says, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. So the crooked things cannot be made straight. And also, when I study nature, study the things around me, everything that lines up as something that is wanting help, that is in need of help, that needs to be made straight, it is so innumerable that it cannot be numbered.
Right.
So here's where the vexation comes in. I study my life, I study things around me, I study nature, the way things work, just to find out that when I finally discover a problem, I can't fix it. And then when I can realize I can't fix it, I keep looking around and find all these other problems. And now I realize that the amount of problems that need to be fixed are so innumerable that I can't even number them. Man, this whole thing is vexation of spirit.
Right.
Maybe I should just obey God.
Right.
And serve God. And maybe I should realize it's not my job to fix every crooked thing. And it's not my job to make everything that's crooked straight. It's not my job to fix everything that's wrong with nature, everything that's wrong with government, or everything that's even wrong with someone around me. It's my job to serve God. Now, I'm going to go over to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, which I wanted to finish chapter 1 tonight, but I didn't. But I'm going to go over to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, because I told you at the beginning of this class, every good sermon has a theme.
Right.
Well, Solomon's theme is that all is vanity. It's everything under the sun is a vain pursuit. In the end of your life, you'll wish you had pursued more of God and less of understanding certain things around you. So his contention, his theme is that it's all vain.
Right.
But he also, in chapter 12, he gives us a conclusion to his sermon, which I like. And I think that every good sermon should have a theme. Every good sermon should be supported. The theme should be supported by evidence, which is what he's going to do in chapters 1 through chapter 12. And then at the end of chapter 12, at the end of the book, he gives us the conclusion. Every good sermon ought to have a conclusion, I think.
That's right.
Verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Now, this is interesting to me. That an older man, an older king, deprived of nothing, with wealth, power, and prestige, and now having sought understanding and wisdom and happiness in the world, comes to the end, toward the end of his life, and he says, it's all vain. Here's my conclusion. This is what you ought to do if you want to avoid a life of vanity. Fear God and keep his commandments. Right. Man, you know, if God gives you a commandment, don't you think that there's purpose in it?
Yes.
Yeah, there's absolutely purpose in it. So if I fear God, if I reverence him, if I worship him, now all of a sudden I'm pursuing something that's not vain. It's not empty. It's not going to make no effect. It's not going to have no effect on the world around me. It's going to have an effect on me, have an effect on those around me. It's not a vain thing. And then if I keep his commandments, he gave his commandments to me on purpose and with purpose. And if he gives them to me with purpose and I live them out, then I will find purpose.
Right.
So what is the conclusion of all of this vanity discussion? Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Praise the Lord. I like that. I like the way he concludes his sermon. Yeah. Now, there's much more to be said in Ecclesiastes. Now, probably the most famous portion of Ecclesiastes is Ecclesiastes chapter 3, where he says there's a time and a season for everything, and it's time to be born, time to die, time to plant up, time to pluck and plant, so forth and so on. I think by the time we walk through chapter 1 and then into chapter 2, I think when we get to chapter 3 and we read those verses, they'll have a different sort of meaning for us. Because we'll see them in light of the context of the first 2 chapters, and then we'll realize why he makes the statements he's making in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8, which I think will be fun. I looked at that tonight before I left the house, and wait a minute, now that was the reason why he said that. But you don't get it if you don't read it verse by verse, line by line. At least I wouldn't get it that way. Shani, you got something?
You know me, I like to read backwards. So, chapter 9 answers a lot of chapter 1's questions for me.
Interesting.
And so I think it's going to be interesting when we get to that portion of it, if we go to chapter 9.
Amen.
But it's really interesting to line it up with chapter 1, but I just wanted to read one verse out of there. There's a lot of them that I want to read, but I'll only read one. Let's see. Okay, so it's verse 10. I'm going to start with the bottom portion of that verse. It says, "For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest." So basically, everything is going to the grave.
Yeah, it really is.
Your knowledge,
Yep.
your wisdom, your work, all the devices,
Yeah.
everything, every invention that man can make, like all of it is going to end up in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure
I also this probably has nothing to do with it, but just because it points out wisdom and knowledge, I don't think a lot of people connect the difference in the two.
Right.
You can have all the knowledge of something, but until you start to apply it to life and to start to live by that knowledge and grow by the knowledge, your growth of your knowledge is when wisdom comes in.
Yeah,
That's right.
Amen.
But even all of that will go to the grave.
Yes, it surely
That's
will.
right.
It surely will. Amen.
Yeah.
But there is something that will travel past the grave, and that is to fear God and keep His commandments. And so, the good text to bring in there. Amen. Good point. Help kind of conclude it. Amen. I like it. All right. If all hearts and minds are clear, we're going to be dismissed in prayer, and we'll have